There it is. Hi, everyone. Yat A. It's Melanie Yazzie, co-host of Red Power Hour. Haven't been on here in a few weeks. I'm joined here by my co-host, Elena. You want to say hi, Elena?
Sengikun.
Oh, I'm calling here from Minnesota Makoche. Oh, sorry. Did I interrupt you?
No, I was just gonna say I'm calling in from Mogopoge and glad to be back.
Oh, well, we have a bit of a somber tone here for this episode. We're joined by two of our Red Nation comrades, Justine Teba and Demetrious Johnson. Justine and Dee, do you want to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get right into it?
Sure. Ubiakindi Singiku. Hello, everyone. My name is Justine Teba. Y'all know me from the Red Nation and Red Media. I'm joining you from Lakota territory, and I'm happy to be here.
Yat everyone. My name is Demetrious Johnson, organizer with the Red Nation, calling in from Teba Territories, aka the 505.
Well, thanks for joining us, comrades. This is our Red Nation Roundtable, right? All four of us are Red Nation members. And what we're going to talk about today is what the world is talking about. We're going to talk about Palestine. We're going to talk about the struggle for decolonization and liberation that is unfolding in this very moment. It's a somber moment, I think, filled with sorrow and despair. But as our Palestinian relatives and comrades have reminded us, it's also a moment filled with hope. I think there's a renewed fight for Palestinian liberation all over the world. And there's also intense violent repression and backlash against Palestinians. In Gaza, of course, the war on Gaza is raging as we record this. It's Thursday, October 19th. And so this is day 12, I think day 12, since Hamas initiated Al-Aqsa Flood, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. Just 2 days ago, we witnessed the horrific bombing, Israel bombing a hospital in Gaza, killing 500 plus Palestinian civilians. There's been a great deal of misinformation, warmongering, fear mongering, and again, just intense backlash, criminalization, and calls actually just for violence against Palestinians in the diaspora here in the so-called United States and those who support their struggle for decolonization, like the four of us here on the organization, the Red Nation. We released a statement of solidarity and love for the Palestinian people, struggle for decolonization on Friday of last week. The release of that statement, as well as an interview that our comrade Nick Estes did with the founder of Electronic Intifada, which was released the prior Monday, just 2 days actually after Operation Al-Aqsa Flood came onto our screens and changed our lives. We have now faced backlash ourselves for that. I recently found out that we were placed on what is essentially a hit list from the Anti-Defamation League that they issued from their Center for Extremism. I believe this came out on the 12th, October 12th, so about a week ago. And the hit list, there were other organizations, mostly left organizations, many socialist organizations that were on that list. I myself was supposed to be on a plenary panel about the question of Palestine within the U.S. left for the National Conference for the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights, which was supposed to be from next weekend, October 27th through October 29th. My panel was scheduled for the morning of October 29th. And I found out just yesterday that that conference was postponed indefinitely because right-wing Zionist repression was successful in pressuring the hotel that was sponsoring the conference to cancel the contract with USCPR. And so, there are shockwaves in all of our lives. But of course, the most important thing in this moment is for us as human beings, as citizens of this horrific empire and settler colony called the United States, for Native people and Native nations to be here and to stand with Palestinians. I believe, and we've been watching, that there is actually overwhelming support globally for the Palestinian struggle for liberation and decolonization. And even though it is truly terrifying in this moment to speak publicly about this issue, I think that is what has prevented many organizations and many people from publicly denouncing Israel, the settler terror that it rains down upon Palestinians on a daily basis, that has only been amplified in these last days since October 7th. The genocide that they're committing against Palestinians in Gaza in this moment. I believe many people are too afraid to speak out because they're seeing what's happening to those who are unequivocal, like us, in their support for Palestine. And this should not come as a surprise. The Red Nation issued our statement in solidarity with Palestine 4 years ago in 2019. Every person on this podcast has been to Palestine on a Red Nation sponsored delegation. I myself went to Palestine in 2011, and it changed my life. I became politicized by what I saw in Palestine. I began to understand settler colonialism and decolonization that much better. As a Native person here in this settler colony, also, belonging to a long history of resistance, anti-colonial resistance against our colonial oppressor, the United States, and our struggles for decolonization and national liberation. And so it should not come as a surprise that the Red Nation stands with Palestine in this moment. And we continue to be here to support our Palestinian relatives, to center them and their struggle in this moment, but also because we're Native, we're indigenous to this place, and we understand the horrors, the scourge that is settler colonialism firsthand. And so our struggle, what we are in solidarity with Palestine, we understand that their struggle for decolonization against their colonial occupier Israel is the exact same struggle that we have here in Turtle Island against our occupier, not the least of which because bankrolls Israeli settler colonialism and many of the technologies and techniques that Israel has used to steal Palestinian land, to murder and imprison Palestinian people, to deny Palestinian people nationhood and self-determination and a future in their own homelands. Israel learned much of that from the United States, and the US continues to arm the violent occupation of Palestinian land by the Israeli government. And in fact, many Israeli citizens, who in fact are actually settlers, they're not just citizens, are also from the United States. They're US citizens. And so they engage in settler colonialism in both places. So they engage in settler colonialism here in our homelands as well. And because of the very powerful role that the United States plays in reproducing settler colonialism globally, but then arming settler colonialism globally, we as the original resistance freedom fighters against settler colonialism, against US imperialism, are here to proclaim our solidarity for all peoples and all nations who struggle against the vile scourge that is settler colonialism anywhere that it touches this ground. And certainly in the belly of the beast, the US settler colony and the US empire, it is our responsibility and our obligation, as it is everyone who has citizenship in the United States, and certainly who has more power than any of us do here in this podcast, to denounce the United States and its support for Israel, to demand an end to US aid to Israel, and also to demand an end to US occupation of our land, land back. We demand nothing less than full national liberation and decolonization here. So I know that was a long kind of introduction, but this is why we're here. This is why the tone is very somber. We are very serious about decolonization. We've been doing work on Palestine for over a decade. It is, in fact, very central to the political identity of the Red Nation, and it is central to our souls as Indigenous people. And this is why we stand for Palestine in this moment, and why we are unafraid to say so. Again, if you have a problem with what Native people are saying on our own land, when we recognize settler colonialism and decolonization, then then what you're doing is you're engaging in a type of anti-Indianism in addition to a type of Islamophobia. You're apologizing for settler colonialism, not just in Israel, but in the United States. And you're denying Indigenous people, like those of us here in the podcast and on the Red Nation, you're denying us the our right to demand land back and to demand decolonization, because we too are survivors of genocide. We are literally only here because our ancestors survived genocide, and we are here today because we survived genocide as the seconds tick by, even as we're recording this episode. And if anyone wants to direct violent repression or backlash, if you want to dox people, if you want to dox Native women, working class Native women, if you want to dox and trash the Red Nation, Nick Estes, who did the interview on Monday with Electronic Intifada, he was doxxed, and the person who doxed him said, "I'm not responsible for what happens." And the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, putting us on blast on their blog, on their website, implying that we are extremists and that we support extremists. So you're cool. So your response to violent settler colonialism and genocide is to create permission for people to violate and to harm Native people, Palestinians, women, and children. If that's your position, and if anyone agrees with that position, I don't know what to say to you. I'm not going to try to convince you to be more human. That's inhumane, and it's disgusting to have that kind of position, especially if you're on Indigenous land, if you're on Native land here, and you're not Native. Like, you are a settler here if you are not Indigenous to this place. And we understand you as such. And the arrogance and the hubris and the complete denial of responsibility for settler colonialism that I have seen in this moment, especially from people based in the US, has been, I guess it's not shocking, but it is really disgusting. And I'm just talking from a perspective as a Native person in this place. It's not that we support terrorism. We don't need to even have a position on Hamas. We're Native. We speak from a point of origin that precedes the advent of Israel or the United States. And this is the position from which we speak. We speak with an authority that is embedded in the land centuries back and kind of flows through us through our ancestors who survived genocide. So thanks for listening.
Yeah, the Palestinians have that same affinity to the land that Native people have here on Turtle Island. This can't be said enough, as Dr. Mel said. We don't have to have a position on Hamas. We don't have to have we don't have to come out with an official statement of support for anyone other than Palestinian people. We're not about governments. We're about indigeneity. And this is not about Jews and Muslims. This is not about Arabs and Israelis. This is about colonizers and the colonized. This is about settler colonialism, and this is about genocide, which has always been used as a tool by settler colonists. And let's not forget also, sorry, I'm getting distracted here when you were talking, Melanie, a 7-year-old boy was stabbed to death in Chicago by his landlord. And his mother was put in the hospital. Palestinian boy, 7 years old, because he was Palestinian. And
6 years old, actually.
I'm sorry?
6 years old.
6 years. So 6 years old. His mother was in the hospital. I mean, can you imagine that? The hatred and the fear that man had that perpetrated that crime. And this is happening all over. This has been going on for decades because of the unconditional support that this imperialist nation has had for Israel since 1948. And it's reached a crescendo now, and there's literally nothing left in Gaza. And I don't know how human beings can stand by and not say anything and not speak up and not raise their voices and shake their fists and whatever else that we can do when you see the level of destruction that has happened in Gaza and the genocide that is being funded by our tax dollars. It's almost unconscionable. Like, I'm not sure how I'm sleeping at night. And there's just no way to feel that level of despair and then turn around and have someone accuse you of anti-Semitism, which has been weaponized by Israel for generations. If you speak against Israel, you're speaking against Jews and you're anti-Semitic, and that makes you a horrible person. That's been weaponized for way too long. And the international community actually recognizes that. And there's a lot of support for the Palestinians, like Melanie said, internationally. But in this country, if you say a word against Israel, someone is going to put you on a terrorist watch list. And
we're the original terrorists. I actually hate that word. I'm going to use the T word, like, because of the nature of US imperialism and the Indian Wars. Like, there's a reason why most of the military, like Geronimo is the name, or indigenous people are the names for a lot of the military technology and apparatus of the US military. Yeah, anyone who has ever resisted US colonialism and imperialism has been deemed the T word in the image of the Indian. Jody Bird writes about this very brilliantly in her book, The Transitive Empire. But yeah, that I was actually trying to think about the genealogy of the T word, because it's just come back with such a vengeance in this moment. And I actually haven't seen that word being utilized to justify genocide and like this level of state violence in maybe since 9/11, I would say, in about 20 years, at least in the United States, just the warmongering. And the moment you trigger that word, it just opens up the reign of hell on anyone who can be labeled that way. And it's important for people to understand that at least in the United States, you know, the origin of that term or the notion of an insurgent or an enemy of the state started with indigenous people who resisted US occupation and resisted settlement and resisted US colonization. And since then, every population, every group, every nation that can be deemed as against the interests of settler colonialism or as against the interests of the United States has been fashioned as an Indian, as an insurgent, as an enemy of the state. And so this is also why we have this position and we speak from this place, you know, as Native people in the OG settler colony, you know, the United States, because we understand where that term comes from. And Native people have always been deemed that. They've always been deemed an enemy of the state when we have protected our lands and our waters, and we have refused, we just have simply refused to leave our lands, or we've resisted settler colonialism. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
And you know what? This has happened as soon as within like 12 days of the Al-Aqsa flood happening. Because prior to this, Red Nation comrades in New Mexico were a part of the No Oñate movement happening that was boiling before all this popped off. That's when there was a failed mass shooting at one of our events. But we were definitely being targeted and labeled as terrorists and radicals just for simply asking them not to spend all of this, asking Rio Arriba County not to put up a statue of colonizer Oñate. And we were subjected to white supremacist violence from a random failed mass shooter. And then also we were posted in the news, the Red Nation specifically, by Alex Naranjo, who was the county commissioner, as these radicals, as these terrorists. And so even it doesn't matter what stage of colonialism you're at, whether it be at the stage of elimination and genocide that we're seeing right now in Palestine, or far further into the stages of colonization where we're simply just asking them to take down and not reinstate statues of our colonizers. It doesn't matter what stage you're at.
No, and even just like building on top of that too, what you brought up, Elena, about the hate crimes against Palestinians in this country right now. That that shooting in Espanola for the Onate statue, that was also we are trying to get that as like a targeted hate crime too towards Indigenous people, because it was put on by Indigenous people, it was advertised as like Indigenous people not wanting this thing. There was nothing but Indigenous women and children and men in that crowd, and for this person to come and target, like, it's happening all over the country. It happened also in you know, in the, during the Black Lives Movement, right, towards our Black relatives. There's like, in this country, there's just like a targeted, it's what we call it, white supremacy, right? There's just targeted hate crimes against Indigenous people, Black people. Now we're seeing it with our Palestinian relatives. But I also just wanted to talk to like our communities, like my relatives, specifically Dene people, on like why we should issue support for our Palestinian relatives in Gaza right now. This isn't like something that's just like so far away that we don't have to worry about it. These things are all connected. Settler colonialism knows no bounds. And I think for us as Dene, we should recognize that more than anything, what is happening in Gaza. Having an open air prison, and this has been going on for almost 2 decades, right? Like Gaza, like, has existed for almost more than 2 decades. And for us, like, we have our story of Huelde, right? Like hell, or like the place we're not supposed to go back to, with Fort Sumner. We were there for 4 years, and all Dene people know this whole story of the Long Walk, and like why we were in prison there. And we were so lucky, so resilient to get out of that place. But for a place like Gaza, like, I've been to Palestine. I saw those like 50-foot, 50 meter tall walls, and how the Israeli government, the military, prevents who comes in and who goes out of that place. There is no escape for those people. And now half of those Palestinians that live in Gaza are children. And like when we see like what is happening, what has happened to us, what has happened to who would be my great grandmother, my great grandfather, that's how close Huelda was to my family, to me. And when you see it happening in real time in our generation, the genocide, the killing, that Huelda, that hell, that suffering, why isn't our people, the Dene people, the first people to respond to that? Because we recognize what that has done for us. Just this year, and Dr. Mel has talked about this, like with losing our water rights, or like the Supreme Court's decision that the U.S. has like no obligation to protect our water rights. The same thing's happening in Palestine. Their water is controlled by the Israeli government, and they at any time can prevent a house or a neighborhood or a community from accessing water. That's the level of settler colonialism our Palestinian relatives are facing right now. And we're not too far away from that. So I guess I'm just urging all Dene people to really just like contact your delegates, organize your chapter house, organize yourselves, whatever organizations you're a part of, whatever workplace you're a part of, and don't let settler colonialism win. This, like what we've been saying, this is the colonizer versus the colonized. And now more than ever, like, we do need to rise up and stand up for our Palestinian relatives who are, I can't, like, just the amount of death, the amount of suffering that you see just logging onto social media is astounding. incomprehensible.
And let's not forget the number of international laws that Israel stands in violation of, if you believe in such a thing. The fact that this U.S. empire has continuously sided with Israel in violation of international law is also, I mean, I'm not surprised, but it should be noted that for a large part of the international community, they side with Palestine. They side with the Palestinians and the Palestinians' right to statehood. The biggest bug for Israel is they demand to be acknowledged that they have a right to exist. But somebody needs to show me why they have a right to exist and the Palestinians don't on their own homelands. And how can they ask people that they're keeping in the largest open air prison in the world, how can they ask them to acknowledge their oppressor's right to exist? And further, the right to rise up in violent opposition to oppression and to colonization is a right recognized by the United Nations. So even legally, if you believe in such things, Israel is wrong. And the Palestinians are fully within their rights to rise up. And I don't believe, in mass murder. I certainly don't believe in genocide. Right now, they're both going on, and something needs to stop. And one thing is that the United States needs to stop sending billions and billions and billions of dollars in military aid to Israel. We need to stop funding genocide.
What you're saying there, Elena, it's like Israel doesn't have the right to exist, just like how the United States doesn't have the right to exist. Neither does Australia or Canada or any other settler colonial project that's based on stolen land. And what you were also talking about earlier kind of brings up what I saw Muhammad al-Kurd talk about today. And he was saying that people get caught up in the semantics of it all. Like they want to say that like, oh, Jews are indigenous to Israel, or they want to say something Ottoman Empire, and then argue back and forth. And so much so to the point where Israel is like literally denying to and lying in front of everybody's faces that they didn't missile bomb that hospital that killed. I mean, I've heard many different numbers, but I think the number is probably around 1,000 from what I heard last reported. They got so caught up on the semantics of it all that like instead of condemning Israel for committing just a heinous war crime by targeting a hospital, we are now instead going through the semantics of like, well, did they, like, to the point where we're questioning if they even did it and having to prove ourselves if they even did it. And it's like that's what these settler colonial genocidal monsters are. They're just like an abusive partner who gaslights you and lies to you and like just gets away with it at the end of the day, and then has the support of all of these other MFs in power.
I wanted to pick up a little bit on my comments earlier. The only reason why someone or an organization or someone in power would call like the Red Nation or Native people the T word, right? Because we are in solidarity with Palestine, is to silence us, right? It's to silence, but then also to subject us to criminalization and to violence. That's what that leads to, and that's what the intention is. But ultimately, it's to silence and then to disappear us. And I think for me, right, I said earlier, like I understand why other people, especially Native nations, maybe people don't understand. Maybe sometimes Native people don't understand why Palestine is so central to our own struggles for self-determination and sovereignty and decolonization. But I think people are being quiet in this moment because they're scared. They're just really scared of speaking up because of the kind of response that, all of the Palestinians are getting. 6-year-old boys are getting murdered in Chicago. There's just intense backlash in this moment. But when you call Native people the T word to silence them, to silence us when we're in solidarity with Palestine, what you're also doing is you're trying to muzzle our own struggle and our own calls for liberation, our own dreams for decolonization. And you're doing that whilst you are on our land, much of which is unceded. And we have said for quite some time now that the centerpiece of the contemporary movement for Indigenous decolonization in Turtle Island is land back, that flag behind Demetrious on his wall in his frame. And so as Indigenous folks, we simply will not be silenced. If you're going to try to silence what we're saying about Palestine, what you're also doing is you're trying to silence our own right in our own homelands to claim and to fight for decolonization. And that's why we refuse. We refuse the frameworks. We just refuse the way people are talking about this in this moment. I refuse to even use now the T word, because to me, it actually feels like a slur. Really, truly, it's being used to justify violence against colonized people, against oppressed nations. And fuck that. We come from colonized people and oppressed nations. The shooting that happened, 3 weeks ago in New Mexico, and the way that Native people are constantly targeted. The United States right now, there's horrific reactionary backlash and quote unquote counterinsurgency, policies and laws that are being passed all over the country to criminalize just basic protest. And I think what most people would consider free speech. People are getting felonies and prison terms. I mean, the number of political prisoners is rising by the day in the United States. And Native people, water protectors at Standing Rock, and folks out of Black Lives Matter, those two movements over the last decade in the United States have hands down faced the most repression, hands down. And you cannot deny the racism, just the intense racism that is built into the T word. If you understand how it's operating in this moment, who it's targeting. And of course, I'm just trying to build the context for how that word is being mobilized and used in the United States right now to just unleash hell on anyone who is advocating for Palestine. And again, I'm just going to remind everyone, and I want Native people to really feel this. I want you to feel this deep inside. This is Indigenous land, and Indigenous people have a moral and a legal right by treaty to demand land back. We have a moral and legal right to support decolonization and to banish settler colonialism wherever it's just it touches down. This is the most vile, evil fucking system in world history, a colonialism, imperialism. We have the right to fight back against that wherever it touches Mother Earth. Because we know if we can banish settler colonialism in another place, that in our hearts we feel free. And when we see other colonized people who have the exact same struggle that we have, we get hope from that and inspiration. We feel that in our hearts because we understand it. We understand it, and we've been fighting it for centuries. And so this is the position that I'm speaking from, and that I would encourage Native people to speak from. The way it's being framed to you, the way you are being told that you must be understanding what is happening right now in Gaza, in Palestine, the way you're being told that you must quote unquote choose sides, right? Or you're supposed to not choose sides and you're supposed to have this both sides kind of perspective. Those are false frameworks that simply justify more settler violence, and they justify and normalize settler colonialism. And we don't do that as Indigenous people. We stand for liberation. We stand for sovereignty. We stand for self-determination. And I just encourage folks to refuse the way that the media, the way that the US, the way that Israel, and the way that just these abusive warmongers online expect us to engage in this issue. Like, you all can, first of all, you're doing this on stolen land again. Most of you are US based and doing this on stolen land. You're doing this on Indigenous land. But also, like, we don't have to accept the terms of engagement that you have set, because those terms of engagement are premised on racism and colonialism and imperialism. And like, I won't participate in that. You know, our righteous struggle for decolonization comes from a completely different place. And it's a struggle for peace. It's a struggle for life. It's a struggle for future. It's a struggle for all life, all human beings on this planet. It's a struggle for a beautiful world that is free from genocide and violence of this kind, that doesn't include bombs. That's where we come from. So if you want to label us the T word for having that dream and coming from that position, okay, we'll just join the ranks of our ancestors who, because they resisted and fought for our freedom, is the only reason we are here recording this podcast.
And things like the Anti-Defamation League labeling the Red Nation radicals is an act of violence. And it's an act of violence against all of us on our own homelands. And it's the same way that when someone comes out and says Indigenous people are anti-Semitic for supporting Palestine, you don't get to call us anti-Semitic on our own homelands. You need to take that shit back to wherever the hell you came from, and eat it, chew it up real good, and swallow it. And you don't get to do that here. We have been subject to enough violence historically, and our ancestors, our land, our water. We are subject to violence on a daily basis. You don't get to add more to that. You don't get to keep figuring out new ways to call us the T word and enact violence on us. That is not going to happen, because we're not going to shut up, and we're not going to stop. And we have a goal, and the goal is simple: decolonization or extinction. And you can be damn sure that Israel doesn't give a shit about that. And you can be damn sure that fucking Joe Schmo in DC doesn't give a shit about that. So it's up to us, if if the people will lead, sooner or later the leaders will follow. But we know where we came from. We know where we're going. We know what our hopes and dreams are. And we have the same hopes and dreams as the Palestinians do. And right now they're going through the most horrific violence that I can even imagine. And you don't get to tell us that we can't speak up, because it ain't going to happen.
Yep. You don't get to tell us how we think about this. You don't get to tell anyone how to think. We think freely about this, and we understand it. We understand it better than you. I mean, truly, and our anti-colonial struggle is hundreds of years longer than our Palestinian relatives. We are also here to provide, I don't know, just that knowledge and that experience in this moment, as we witness this horror unfolding in front of us. And this is the pledge that we made when we wrote our statement 4 years ago, when the Red Nation wrote our statement. We make this pledge to welcome Palestinians on Indigenous land. We actually wrote this in the statement, to extend kinship and hospitality to you. And it is because we understand it so deeply, and we have been fighting this so long, that's why we do that.
I would also encourage our Indigenous relatives here on Turtle Island, if you don't know the history, if you don't understand the Nakba, if you don't know what happened in 1948, if you don't know what the Balfour Declaration is, if you are curious about what the history of this conflict is, then read. And don't read shit by the Israelis. Read honest to goodness history, and read sources that are objective and learn, because once you start reading this, it's going to sound really fucking familiar to you. And you're going to start understanding exactly why the Red Nation is standing up and speaking out for Palestine, because it's the same story. And Melanie and I've talked a lot about this, and particularly when we get down into sort of the despair of some of the things we talk about. And we reinforce each other. And one of the things that we say a lot is it's up to us to keep telling the story. It's up to us to pass the story down to our descendants. We have to be the ancestors, and we have to be good ancestors. So I say the same thing to our relatives about Palestine. Like, they may not have much time to tell their story, so someone has to pick it up. And we know that story because we've been there. And it's time that people started shouting it from the rooftops and saying, this is not okay. You cannot continue to do this in this world, in this time, in this day, with everything that we as human beings should have learned from the past. How can we keep allowing this to happen? So it's up to us to keep telling the story and to keep pushing the story and to keep saying, read the story, listen to the story, watch the story, hear the story, because we've got to be the ones to keep the story going.
I'll admit that prior to being politicized and coming to the Red Nation, I was one of those natives who had no idea about Palestine or why the struggle for Palestine was important at all. At that point, this was like in 2017, 2016 is when I started to become more conscious of like politically, especially after Standing Rock and then with the Entrada movement, Santa Fe, as I said over and over again. But it's like people want to make it so complicated. They think that Palestine is on the other side of the world, but it's their story is so close to home. And so I'm going to try a little bit out here on the show. Just a fun fact right now. The Red Nation podcast has actually divested from our previous podcast recording software website. They were an Israeli based software and website. We apologize. We had no idea, but then at the end of the day, we looked it up and we're just so disgusted. So we immediately moved off of that platform and chose another one. And this one has some cool functions. So this map right here is that I'm showing for our listeners at home. You can see this on the YouTube channel, but I'm showing a map of the Indian land cessions, and it's straightforward. You've seen it. You've seen it starting from basically from 1776 or whenever the U.S. was started, and it shows the process of Indian land cessions over the course of time, all the way from the U.S. being entirely, all the land within the U.S. being entirely indigenous land, and then going through the process into becoming stolen land and then into reservations. If you look at the Palestinian map, it's the exact same map. That is the exact same process that we're looking at of settler colonialism. And with just those two images, that is what unlocked everything for me, and I understood. So if you don't understand, and that's what it's about. It's about the land, and it's about settler colonialism, and it's about being indigenous, and it's about being a colonizer. The process of settler colonialism is about the land, and to be indigenous is to be under a political identity which describes the original peoples before, whose land was stolen, basically. And that is why we are connected in struggle. It's very simple. It's about the land, it's about stealing the land, and it's about forcibly removing the people who are on top of that land, the indigenous people, which is us and all of our tribes here in Turtle Island, and right now the Palestinians being colonized by Israelis. And it's so simple, yet it took me so long in my life to realize that and learn that. And then, fortunately, I was sent on a delegation with the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights when they asked if they wanted to send any of our membership, if Red Nation wanted to send any of our membership to Palestine. And I was lucky to have gone on that. And what I further realized on that trip is like what stage in settler colonization that they are in. And, as we can see on the TV, they're in the elimination era of their settler colonization. And it's just a trip. It took me a long time to digest what I was seeing and to come up with any kind of analysis for myself for what I thought about Palestinians and indigenous people. And even going there, I was sort of like I guess like envisioning a bridge that I wanted to build between my people and Palestinians. And what I ended up finding on it was just how connected we really are through that struggle. I it took me a long time to pin down the feelings I was having coming back, and I have felt such a sorrow for my people that I had never felt before. When I came back, I cried on the plane the whole way home, and it took me months after to realize that I was so sad because I actually saw indigenous people existing in like prior to elimination. Like it was like I will never see my people prior to elimination. I'll never see our old city. Like when we went to the old cities around Palestine, all I could think of was Acoma Pueblo and how advanced our old cities would have been had we were allowed to keep growing and keep developing and keep on just evolving as people. And that we were denied that was stolen and taken from us, and we're living in our own ruins basically. And but we're fortunate to, let me say that also. But I imagine that Acoma would look a lot like the old cities that are in Palestine, people included. And and then from there I just get this just like I could scream on the top of a mountain and it wouldn't add up to how just the anger and sorrow you feel from knowing that you'll never see your own people existing at that capacity. And then also to go into a darker place where you're asking yourself, will Palestinians be like us one day? And that's something that I've been sitting with for since I've been to Palestine. And then now watching it on the TV, just the blatant genocide that people are going through right now. Like, will they be like us? Because that's exactly what they're doing to Gaza. They're trying to make reservations. They're trying to displace people into places where they weren't that they didn't grow up, or where their people are. Like they're doing exactly what the US did to us. They're doing settler colonialism, which includes elimination and removal of indigenous people. And they are trying to make them just like us. And that's the connection here. And I always think, Dee was talking about the long walk. I think of like the Trail of Tears. I think of the Pueblo Revolt. All these like big moments of indigenous history that we talk about here in Turtle Island. Since a child, I've always thought of what would I have done, if I existed in those times. Even as a kid, I kind of because I didn't really have any awareness to what was going on around me as a child. But as a child, I was like, oh, I missed out on the days where I could protest, like thinking of like seeing hippies in the movies or whatever and being like, oh, protesting is so cool, or thinking about history and the Pueblo Revolt and thinking how I missed out. But actually it's happening right here, right now. And I do know what I would have done, and it's everything in my power, which isn't a lot. And I imagine that's what happened and how those things were allowed to happen in the past, what more can you do? I have my phone. I'm sharing everything that I can on our platforms. I'm here to talk to an audience of thousands of people, to try to connect our struggles, try to voice this, try to gain support and understanding for Palestine. But like on the ground, like I can't do anything. What am I? So we're mobilizing. We're going to get out there and stuff. But I also always wondered too, like, how did people allow it to happen? And now I'm seeing how they did it, through mass media propaganda in favor of the colonizer, through like outright blatant lying in favor of the colonizer, and just like framing of indigenous people, like how we're seeing right now, being called terrorists, and all of these other things that we're talking about right now. Like, it's such a weird thing to go back in time only to come here right now.
And the other thing about settler colonialism is that we talk Red Nation Rising. I co-authored a book with Comrade Nick and two wonderful relatives and comrades, Jennifer Dennett-Dale and David Correa. And what we convey in that book comes from the Red Nation, and the experience we've had organizing around what we call border town violence over the last almost decade since we founded the organization in Albuquerque. And in Red Nation Rising, we really study the settler, the ontology, the identity of a settler. And in addition, right, to what Justine is saying, like, how did this come to be? How did the world let this happen? This isn't just like some moment that came out of nowhere. This has been building for decades, for centuries, settler colonialism. And like most types of imperialism, like most types of colonialism, settler colonialism must be maintained through force. You cannot occupy someone else's land without force. Media work is the art of persuasion. It's the art of what Marxists call the false consciousness that descends upon the masses, right? It is the art of getting people through culture, through media, through intellectual work to sign on to, right? To reproduce the common sense of settler colonialism. That's how people become settlers, right? That's how they transform into that identity and it becomes their own. But settler colonialism the colonial occupiers cannot exist and maintain dominance and hegemony on stolen land without force. In the United States, it's police. It's police who do that work. They are the foot soldiers of settler colonialism. This is why many of our major uprisings over the last decade have been against police. This is something that is very well understood. There's a reason why Indigenous people are killed at higher rates by police in the United States than any other group. There's a reason why Indigenous women are incarcerated at higher rates than any other group in the United States. It is because of that's how U.S. settler colonialism maintains control over the land, over land that does not belong to it. It has to do it through force. And in Israel, as Justine's saying, you just said this so brilliantly, it was like extremely yoded. Like, we're seeing the past, but it's happening right now. And that kind of blew my mind. But we're seeing an active military occupation, essentially, in Israel. I mean, the police here are very militarized. They're trained by the Israeli army, right? So the police in the US are militarized. So they're like a pseudo-military, they're a pseudo-occupying force. But in Israel, with billions of dollars from the US government, they are actually militarily occupying Palestine. And this is the kind of military occupation that Demetrious was talking about earlier with our people, with the Net people in Huelde. That was an actual military occupation. I mean, they literally had us in a concentration camp that was run by the US Army. Our people were starved and murdered and removed and death marched to Fort Sumner by the US military after they engaged in a scorched earth policy on us in our own homelands. And so Settler colonialism happens through persuasion, right? It happens through the things that maybe sometimes we don't recognize are entering into us and convincing us to sign on to some form of domination or some type of hegemony. But it also happens through force. And that force cannot be denied. That force is bombs. That force is the charred bodies of Palestinians and our relatives when the US colonial occupying force charred the bodies of our relatives and their scorched earth policy when they removed us to Huelde. It comes in the form of fences, of walls, of guns. And this, you cannot deny that this is what colonialism looks like in Israel. And so it has looked like this since the advent of that settler nation. And yet we're being told, right? We're being told that somehow we're wrong. Like we're wrong. Like you're not seeing what you're actually seeing. I mean, we know better.
And here across Turtle Island, after the mass murders, the hangings, the long walks, the Trail of Tears didn't work to destroy us completely, then they came for our children. And that's what we're seeing now with all of the added media focus on the boarding schools. Because if you want to destroy the future of a people, you destroy the children. And so what Justine said resonated too, because I see the same thing. Like, what stage are they in Palestine, and what will come next for Palestinians under Israeli occupation? And I don't think it's going to go the same way. I don't think it's going to evolve the same way. What's happening now is this regeneration through violence. If you want to justify destroying the enemy, then you make them try to destroy you first. And then you get this wave of support for genocide because, well, they fired first. And that was what happened with westward expansion and this manifest destiny across Turtle Island. Was they're trying to keep us from taking this land, which they're not using anyway. But if we try to move west, they're going to kill us. So we have to kill them first. And after closing Gaza, Gaza has a long history of being open and then occupied, and then Israelis moved out and then turned it into a prison, and they want it back. So they're going to start killing everybody that's standing in the way of taking that land. And it's all about the land, and it's all about how they can access the land and take the land without seeming like they're committing war crimes. But we know they are committing war crimes in the process of taking the land. And even 30, 40 years ago, population transfer is what they called it. Population transfer, moving people out of areas in the West Bank so that they could start building Israeli settlements. Population transfer is genocide. It's just a nicer name for genocide. So where are we?
That's a sanitized euphemism for displacement and genocide.
Yep. So it is also familiar, and it's also horrific that it's familiar. I feel like it hits on so many levels, and it's like being spun around and spun around. And then when you stop and you're trying to level off and you look out, and what are you seeing? Is it Palestinians? Is it Native people? It's all the same thing. It's all blurred together because we're all in the same place. We're just further along in the colonial project than they are. And also, the United States Empire at the time, it was committing genocide on all Native people, didn't have nuclear bombs. And we know not only that Israel has nuclear bombs, but that they're just fucking crazy enough to use them, which is scary.
And yet, our Palestinian relatives and our own people never stopped fighting, never stopped living, never refused. We would refuse to leave our homes. We'd have to physically be removed from our homes. And we still speak our languages and we still eat good food. You know, we still maintain our traditions. We still know where like our ancestors are and where our sacred sites are. And I think in the Red Nation we talk for years we've talked about right that steadfastness, that thamud that Palestinians talk about, and just the sheer strength of Palestinian resistance to annihilation and elimination. And we draw from that same history and that same strength of our own people because, again, we would literally not be here had our people also not exhibited samud. And so, as Justine said, right, we're watching history, but it's now. And in Palestine. And we remain spellbound, I guess, in some ways, and deeply inspired by Palestinians' refusal to leave and their refusal to stop being themselves in their own homelands. It's transformative. And I can imagine that all colonized and formerly colonized people throughout the world are watching this and feeling the exact same way. Because when we see that kind of fight, we too believe, that we can be free. And it reminds us of what our strength is as well.
Let's go. Let's go. Because, we're in like a utter state of like despair and horror and fear, but also just like immense hope. And and we believe in their struggle. We believe in their resistance. And it's very inspiring also. One more thing. Nick had posted a clip in the podcast chat the other day, and I thought it was pretty funny. Like it's a little video of Fox News, and it's all GOP warns. Today it's Israel, tomorrow it's us. And then I'm like, let's go. They get it. And then like the news anchor, she's like, she's like, the US is the great Satan and Israel is the little Satan. Like, I'm like, yeah, no, go off Fox News. and that's honestly how I view Palestinians. Every Palestinian I come through, like that comes through into my life, like we always just have a profound conversation because they get it, we get it, we connect on that level. And Palestinians, like, if the US is the great Satan and Israel is the little Satan, then indigenous people of Turtle Island are the big sister and Palestinians are the little sister. And I'll fucking ride for y'all.
They had us in the first half, not gonna lie. But I don't know. I was like, what was the word? What was the tone we were using? Somber? Somber.
Sorrow, somber, somber.
Somber, not sovereign. Somber. As somber as this podcast episode is, I don't know, like there is also just like something very beautiful about like the mass demonstrations that have been put on in support of our Palestinian relatives. Something that I've never seen. I started organizing in like 2014, and it was at the University of New Mexico, and like it seemed like we'd have like one like every month, you know, just calling for like the freedom of a political prisoner in Palestine. And there would literally only probably be like at most like 10 of us just outside the bookstore, right? Like, but just seeing like hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people just like organizing and just marching and taking over streets and just have, I don't know, just having just such a fire and just like just speaking literally from the rooftops, telling them to free Palestine. Like that is something that I don't know, just seeing like those little like 10-person like demonstrations to something like that, just like within a span of like 9 years, 8 years, like that is beautiful to me. And that gives me like a sense of hope, and we should all be hopeful. I I watched this movie. It's still in theaters. It's called The Creator. Not that sacred, but like it's called The Creator. And you know, it's like the the oppressed in that movie. You know, they're fighting for like their right for life, and then you're like, you know what's gonna happen? We're gonna win because they're quite literally up against the U.S. Like the U.S. is framed as the bad guy in this movie. They're like, what happens? You know what's gonna happen if we win? Absolutely nothing. Like, you know, they're throwing all this propaganda that we're gonna take over the world and we're gonna kill them and we're gonna like, I don't know, just like annihilate the world or whatever. It's just like no, like if we win, like we have like the right to life. And you know what happens if we win? Like us, like indigenous people, you know what happens if we win? We're gonna have clean water. We're gonna have like I don't know, like our relatives have gone extinct. They're gonna start coming back. Like it's just gonna be a beautiful world. And like who doesn't want that? Like why shouldn't we fight for that? Land back, baby. Like I don't know. Like it's just kind of ridiculous that people just want to live in this just like this fucked up like capitalistic world where like people are just like dying on the daily. You just see like oh another species has got extinct. Oh like we just found more microplastics in like this like water reservoirs. Like do we have to live that way? No, no. Like I mean I don't know. This is like what indigenous people have been saying forever. So why don't you just listen to us by now? Like it's not too late. It's not too late.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what this is all about. Like, this is about like land back, water back, relatives back, so that we can just live a good life. Like, we don't give a shit about your capitalist structure and imperialism. Like, it's sad to see like so many people give up and just be like, yeah, this is the height of humanity. When it's like, no, nobody wants that. I don't want that. Who the hell wants to work a 40-hour hourly wage in the US? Like nobody does. And I just oh shoot, I had a point to this. I'm so sorry, D. You're going off and I was like, hell yeah, let's go. Oh man, where was I going with this? Um but I don't know. Basically what I'm trying to say is that like literally just having the freedom to exist and like experience a human life, to experience like things that are of humanity, like love and care and those kinds of things that humans like naturally do, is what we strive for. And that's what we're labeled the T word for wanting, is because we just want a simple, humble human existence. And that, you know, going back to what Melanie said earlier, that's why these settler colonial projects need the force that they need to exist, to justify their existence, to make an existence for themselves. They need that much force to stay existing, because it's not natural, it's not how it's supposed to be, and it's actually a lot of fucking work to live that way.
And that work always comes at the expense of the earth and the water and the air and the creatures and all of our non-human relatives. And Dee, when you were talking about, just the simple things in life, I was thinking, I just want some really good Palestinian olive oil, and I want to see the Palestinians be able to take care of their trees and hug their trees, because like we hug our trees, and I'll trade them some piñons for some olive oil, and we'll all live happily ever after. And they make tortillas like we make tortillas, except they call them something different. And like a good tortilla and some olive oil and some piñons, like that's life, man. That's all you need. And chili.
And chili. So I helped with security for the biggest Palestine solidarity action I've ever seen or been to in the United States in like 12 years of doing this work. There were estimated 20,000 people came out last Sunday in Ministro Tomacoche in Minneapolis to march in solidarity with Palestine. And one of the brothers, a Palestinian brother, was kind of like emceeing the rally before the march. And, he said over and over again, he's like, all we want is equality. He's like, all we want, we're not trying to kick people out of our land. He's like, we just want to have the right to live free and to live in peace with one another, and I think a lot about like the two-row wampum approach, right? Where you live together, but you don't interfere, and you certainly don't attack each other. You engage in a correct relationship with each other when you coexist. And this is also the premise of plurinationalism, which is coming out of the Indigenous Socialist Project in Latin America, where every people and every nation has a right to self-determination, and they have a right to live free as a nation from interference and violence by other nations, which, that's what imperialism is. Imperialism and colonialism is, the epitome of interference with other nations and controlling their destiny. And when they don't abide by your domination, you simply crush them. You crush them, you level their nation into smithereens, and you murder their people, and you displace them forever. And, Nick has said this, comrade Nick says this a lot. Like when you're in the US and you're talking about decolonization, you're talking about land back, right? There's like invariably that person, they're usually like a white person, a white American, who like raises their hand in the audience, and they're like, but what happens to me? Like, do I have to go back to Europe? And it's like, no. Like, you think that, let's say if Indigenous people, we resumed a rightful relationship with the earth and we were able to have true self-determination and land back, like, you think we're going to do to you what you did to us. And that won't happen. That's nowhere within even our realm of possibility, because that is not what our existence, that's not what our political frameworks, that's not what our legal and moral compass is built on. We simply want equality. We simply want peace. Truly. We want to be able to eat olives and green chili in peace. We want to share it with you, as long as you don't take it from us. And as long as you abide by the rules of non-interference and by the rules of peaceful relationship between the different nations who would live, on the land. You would have to have a different relationship with the land that isn't based on exploitation and extraction. And you couldn't treat people like you couldn't make people live in a hellscape of your creation. You can't exploit people and kill them for your own benefit, right? Like, that's what the world could look like. And here you see, right, all of the nations that are saying that Israel has a right to self-defense, right? Israel has a right to self-defense after, October 7th. And in that, I see the same kind of logic where it's like, well, you're going to do to us what we are actually doing to you and what we have done to you. And here, this Palestinian homie, he's just like, nah, dog. That ain't what we're trying to do. First of all, we're just trying to survive because you're just murdering us constantly. But also, like, legit, like, we just want to live in peace with you. We ain't even trying to, like, expel you from the land. We just want to have equality. And he said that at least 4 times when he was emceeing. So that's the future that we are struggling for. Those are the values that we have as Indigenous nations and Indigenous people.
Colonizing is for the losers who lost at humanity.
Yeah, you're like just putting all of this effort into like a losing game.
We just want to be left alone.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. And we actually want to leave everyone else alone too and interact with you in like a very cooperative, very peaceful, and a very mutually beneficial manner. That's pretty much it.
That's it. Just leave us alone. We'll leave you alone.
That sounds like something you can get on board with. Then that's why you should support Palestine. That's why you should support any struggle against colonialism and imperialism, frankly. And I believe that colonialism, that we will not have to use this word in any contemporary present context in the future. It will be something of the past. It will be something that we finally expelled from the earth once and for all. Please, please, Creator and all that is good and holy, can we have an end to colonialism once and for all? Enough. Enough. And that is the struggle that is happening right now. It's a pivotal struggle in the long fight to end colonialism. That is what's happening right now in Palestine. And that is why it is so important to be on the right side of history with this one.
And quit using the T word. Quit putting targets on our back. I don't think we sound really that dangerous, do we? I mean, we just want green chili and olives and piñons. Like, kind of silly when you're pointing the finger at us and calling us the T word, isn't it?
For real. I don't even have the energy. Like, do you know what I want to do in a perfect world? I want to do nothing. I want to sit under a tree and eat berries with my husband. Like, but I have to go and mobilize for Palestine because they're doing a genocide. Fuckers. You took away my perfect, like, carefree life because you gave me a reason, not even a reason. You obligated me to do this work. Like, until colonization is over, like, until we get land back, until we get imperialists to stop genociding the humble people of the earth, like, I have shit to do and I don't want shit to do.
Yup. I think we're kind of at a natural concluding point with this episode. Red Nation issued a statement in solidarity with Palestine, like I mentioned earlier on Friday, and we have demands. Yeah, they're demands, they're not recommendations for everyone, but we are really hoping, especially that our people, that Native nations in both Canada, First Nations in Canada and Native nations here in the US, we hope and we urge you. We don't just hope, we urge you to sign on to boycott, divestment, and sanctions. You can go to therednation.org to read our statement and the demands. I'm just going to read them here at the end. So our calls to action and our demands are: all Native people, organizations, and governments should heed and adopt the Palestinian call to boycott, divest, and sanction Israel and all institutions complicit in Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. So us, like, canceling our Riverside subscription and now coming over here to StreamYard is our commitment. It's an example of us adopting BDS as a Native organization, just to give you an example. Demand number 2, all Native people organizations and governments should issue solidarity statements and mutual aid for Palestine and Gaza. Again, you can look at our solidarity statement. There are many others that are emerging every day, every hour. There are plenty of templates and examples that you can use. Demand number 3, U.S. out of Palestine, no more military aid to Israel. There are plenty of Palestine solidarity organizations in the U.S. that have toolkits for how you can engage your congressional representatives. I'm tired. To put pressure on the government to stop providing billions of dollars of military aid to Israel. Demand number 4, end the siege on Gaza. Literally just stop killing Palestinians right now. Demand number 5, land back for Palestinians and the right of return for Palestinians. Some of you may not know, but for example, in Gaza, many of the Palestinians that are fleeing Gaza right now have already been displaced from other lands that Israel settled and claimed. And then they were shuttled into Gaza almost 2 decades ago. And so the right of return, many Palestinians no longer live in Palestine because they were expelled by Israeli occupation. And so the right of return is actually incredibly important for Palestinians. Demand number, where am I at? 6, free all political prisoners, free all Palestinian political prisoners, free Leonard Peltier as well. And then demand number 7, end the occupation, and the occupation in Palestine and the occupation in Turtle Island and the occupation everywhere. Please, we urge you, this is, like we said, this is a pivotal moment in the history of the struggle against colonization and colonialism. What's happening right now is going to change history. It's shifting the earth on its axis. Truly, that's my understanding of what's happening. And colonialism is only, like what we've been saying, colonizers only maintain control through force. And statistically, they're much smaller than the masses. They're the 1%, actually, right? Wasn't it something like 40 or 60% of Gaza is occupied, or part of the land that was removed is occupied by 6,000 Israeli settlers. And then 2 million Palestinians occupy less than half of that land. And so you can statistically see how small settler populations are compared to the masses that belong to the darker nations, right? To the global south, and to Native nations, communities like the Native nations that are under colonial occupation in Turtle Island. And so we belong with the people, and the people are with us, and the people are with Palestine. Join the billions of people from the past, the present, and the future who are on the right side of history. Stand up now for Palestine. It is very important. It is actually crucial to our future, the future of the planet, that we do this right now. Thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week with another Red Nation podcast episode.